Hello, welcome to Quilts and Other Hackbee Accidents. I'm Sherry. I want to share a little bit of a story about how I've turned some scraps into a charity quilt. This started some time back when I came home with a bag of batik scraps that were anywhere from a half an inch to maybe an inch and a half, inch and 3/4. And as I was driving home, I realized that this would be a great opportunity for me to use up my flannel scraps, which I have oodles of, and my batting scraps, which I have oodles of, to turn into a Quilt-as-you-go string block. Now, I've never done a Quilt-as-you-go string block. In fact, I've shied away from string blocks for years because, well, it's just not my jam. But given the opportunity to turn something into nothing and then turn it into a beautiful charity quilt, I was like, what the heck? Let's do it. So I started by cutting flannel and batting in 7.5-inch squares, and then cat hair, and then just randomly lining them up from the center all the way out, and made some pretty nice blocks. Now, I made a video about this some time back, and I gave you some really bad advice that I feel I must apologize for. The first thing was I said, save all those itty bitty scraps so when you get to the corners, you can fill them in because you might need it. Well, might not have been the best advice ever. Let me show you what I mean. This block is a perfect example of saving it till you get to the very end. And look how fiddly and tedious that is. And honestly, little corners like this have caused me problems. I've had trouble getting them to feed through the machine and things like that. So my first advice is don't do that. You can overcome that by a couple of different things. One is plan a little better. I'm not the best planner sometimes, but just plan to put a larger piece at the end. Now, if for some reason that plan doesn't work, you can, when you get to the end, you don't have to sew right there at the edge. Back it up a little bit and give yourself a little more room to work. Corners like this will work much better for you. They will not tangle up and be so bulky. So, step one of oops. But that's okay. I learned it. Moving on. But finally, the thing I would say is I'm going to show you how to connect these blocks now because they're beautiful. But plan ahead. Again, I'm kind of not a planner sometimes. I start with this fantastic idea, and then I kind of work my way through it and realize I have to modify it a little bit or figure something different out. So basically, I had to come up with a plan B because in order to connect these blocks, you're going to need two pieces, one for the back sashing and one for the front sashing. The piece for the back sashing is going to be 1 1/8 inches. The piece for the front sashing is going to be 1 3/4 inches, and then you're going to fold it over. And I'll show you how to connect these blocks. But the problem with this is I got a bunch of scraps that varied from 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches-ish. Very few of them got close to that 2-inch mark. So when I realized that, after of course I'd made 108 blocks, I decided I better have a plan B just in case I couldn't come up with that 1 3/4 inch. Now the 1 1/8 for the back, that's easy. I cut lots of those. But what I did was I went back to my stash, which I'm trying to use up anyway, and I found some batiks there that I think should work. Let me show you what I found. So I found this lovely blue batik, and I found kind of a pinkish mauvish floral. And then I found a lavender that actually, you know, kind of goes with all the tones that I had in the quilt itself. So that was my backup plan, and I'm really glad I had a backup plan because I didn't have enough of the original scrap fabric to make the sashing pieces. So we're going to put the sashing on this, and you're going to have 2 pieces of sashing to sew on at the same time. This first one is an 1 1/8 wide, and this is going to go on the back. So you're going to have right side to the flannel side or whatever you've put on the back of yours. And sometimes on batiks, I think I can tell which is right and which is wrong, and some I can, but they're batiks, they're pretty forgiving, unlike a lot of printed fabrics. All right, now there it is. Then the front sashing is 1 3/4 wide, and it's been pressed, and it's going to be put on also at the same time as this back sashing. These little clips have been enormously helpful because there is a lot of bulk here and things are wiggly. When I put these string blocks together, because I was going through flannel batting and multiple layers of seams, I used my walking foot and a number 16 sewing needle. I just realized my thread is wound around my needle. That's not going to go well. Let me fix that. There we go. Actually, for this, I'm definitely keeping the walking foot on, but I've taken it up to an 18, which is for like jeans and really heavy fabric, because there's so much bulk here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of actual fabric plus cotton batting. That's a lot of bulk, and my poor little machine is doing just a great job, but we got to help them out as much as we can. You can possibly see how much lint is on my machine. I'm telling you what, working with flannel and cotton batting on this quilt-as-you-go idea has generated so much dust. I bet I've cleaned my machine every day I've worked at the machine, even if it was only a couple or 3 hours, because there's just so much lint and dust. So let's sew this on and trim it up, and I'll show you how to attach it to the next block. It's still a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm just going to cut these ends approximately, because we can trim them up later if we need to. There we go. To attach this to the next block, you can see I've got my pattern here, and I'm going to flip this over. So again, they're right sides to right sides. I'm going to square my blocks up to each other. I'm not really going to worry too much about whether or not I cut this end neatly, because you just saw me just kind of whack it. But I want the blocks to be square to one another. And we can trim this sashing however we need to. Now we're going to sew this on. This is the other problem I had with this block. It tends to want to eat the corners. I should have gotten my thread bunny out, but we'll make it work. Still just a 1/4 inch seam. Okay. Can you see how this now is lying flat? Then we're just going to finger press this over the top to seal both of those, all of those raw edges. And that's how we're going to connect the front to the back and close up this quilting. Now, I did find, as I was going along, that pins really did help out on this stage. I know sometimes I get in a hurry and I don't pin things, and I usually pay for it with wonky blocks and things that don't square up right. But this is a project I've been working on long enough that I really want it to look nice. And I think this has really helped me to make sure everything connects. So let's go ahead and sew this on. This seam you're going to want to put very close to this turned over edge, because you're really just top stitching it down, because we've got fabric over here, so we're going just over that, and it's going to be a nice top stitch. I've always used my pins perpendicular to the sewing line, and I don't have trouble very often with my sewing machine hitting the pins. And in situations like this where you've got a lot of bulk you're managing, it's really helpful. Okay, do you see how that little edge just got picked up under my feed dog? With the needle down, we're just going to let it drop down, but that's how close I am to this edge. I like these little thread mice. They just save you so much trimming when you're done. See how nice and neat that is? Let me get this up here so you can see how close that is to the edge. And it's just a top stitch. When you flip it over, if everything has gone well, it won't show because it's going to be just on the, it won't show because it's going to be just beyond the edge of the sashing on the back. It's hard to see, and that's the goal, is to kind of let it disappear. Now let's add these two blocks to the rest of the length so I can show you how to put the columns together. So putting these long columns together is identical to putting the smaller pieces, the smaller blocks together. It's just, there's more of it. So the first thing I did was I made sure I've preserved my pattern. And I do want this diamond pattern, so we're good there. Now here's my 1.5 inch piece that's going to go on the back. I'm just going to clip that so I get started in the right spot. And then here's the 1 3/4 inch piece that's been pressed, so it's folded over, and the raw edge is going to match up right there. I'm going to move this out of the way because I don't need it just yet. I just wanted to make sure I had everything lined up so my pattern would be consistent. So I'm just going to go along, clipping this edge just to keep it lined up so I can sew it together. What I have found was that sometimes the blocks stretch a little bit, or one piece of fabric will stretch a little bit. So this is really just a guideline. Things may move around, but as long as I keep a line on my edges and keep my 1/4 inch seam, it's going to be just fine. Not everybody likes to pin, but I think on this project It's well worthwhile. And as I come to places where I've got a little uneven spot, it's pretty darn easy just to snip it and make it work without harming the integrity of the quilt in any way. Also, much easier to fix it at this stage than when you're trying to put the two pieces of sashing together and they're not laying flat. That's really the key to this technique. Which, by the way, I did not make up myself at all. This is a very old technique that I learned back in the early 2000s. And I learned it out of the book, More Reversible Quilts. Early 2000s, the idea of Quilt-as-you-go hadn't been really named yet. I don't know when it got named, who named it. The original authors called it reversible quilts. And this is their technique. I'll be sure to acknowledge them in the description below. All right, here's another important piece. Because this is such a long seam, I did have to join two pieces of fabric. Now, lots of people have very strong opinions about how to do this when you're making sashing or binding. I chose to do the angle rather than abutting them because I've got so much bulk. This spreads the bulk out a little bit. But that also tells me I've got my right sides together, which is what we wanted. There we go. This would be a good time to check and make sure you have plenty of thread in the bobbin, because nothing's more annoying than a long seam that is without bobbin thread at some point. Let's get this sewn together. I'll be back in a minute to connect these two blocks. All right, let's connect these just like we did the others. There's just more bulk here. So in this particular case, I strongly recommend pins. And we're going to flip this. So I verified that my pattern is correct. The trickiest part of this is making sure these sashing seams line up. Because like I said a few minutes ago, this stretches a little bit, so we may have to ease some things in to make sure they work. But I know these blocks are 7.5 inches square, so we can make this work. It's only fabric. So I'm going to start, and definitely pins are our friends on this one. I'm going to square the end of this block up here, and I'm going to pin it away from me. Yes, I learned that the hard way too, by sewing it towards me, and well, that just was painful. All right, now that I've got the end pinned, and this is my way of doing this. If you find a better way to do it, by all means, do it your way. But as I mentioned, making sure these sashing pieces line up is really the challenge here. Because even if my sewing is imperfect, there's no reason I can't make it look right. So I'm going to pin this going away from me, and then I'm going to clip this edge for sewing. Let me get you a little closer so you can appreciate that. So I've got a pin here and a pin here to hold these blocks steady. This gets really heavy once you start moving it through the machine. But now I'm just going to use clips on these edges so that as I'm sewing, I don't have to worry about the pins. The other thing is I found that if I pin and clip both, actually it comes out really nice. It's all about planning, I guess, which is ironic. Now, some of you may be wondering about the area I'm working because it's clearly not a high-end sewing table and all of those things. It's actually the sewing machine case that my mother had her sewing machine in when I was a kid. Now, that sewing machine is long since gone, and my husband has adapted this machine so that my little portable Janome fits in it. But that's also why in some of these screenshots, you're going to see weird things holding my sewing machine in place. I'm not a tall person, which is really kind of funny because I'm actually quite short. So I've had to modify things around here so that the machine is sort of at a usable height for me, even though it's not the original machine for this sewing table. But you know, that's okay. I like having stuff that is from my family, things that make me remember when I learned to sew, how I learned to sew. My mother is fortunately still alive, and we still talk about some of those things. Anyways, I was saying, this gets very heavy, and so I chose to put 2 columns together at a time, and then 2 sets of 2 together, so 4 columns. That way I could control the bulk a little bit. Oh, we should probably talk about some of the other designs that could have been made with this string block. There's one where all of the diagonals go the same direction. There's one where you can make kind of a chevron. Then I found this diamond kind of shape, and I really liked it. I thought it probably was going to be easier to keep track of as I started sewing, and it worked out well. I'm very pleased with the final product. All right, give me a few minutes to put all this together, and I'll show you what this quilt looks like. Okay, I've got these 2 columns sewn together. You can see really how flat this lays, and so this folds over very easily. You'll remember when we were connecting the blocks, I didn't really pin it or do anything special. I just did a finger press. Well, that doesn't work on this. I suppose if you're braver than I am, you could, but I really, because of the bulk and the weight that we're working with here, found that pinning this, now I'm going to pin it in the middle of the block as well, but before I do that, I'm going to make sure that these sashes match up, because right now I've got a little forgiveness in this, so I can really square it up and make it look good. And then in the middle of the seam here, again, we can square it up and make it look really nice. We're going to do this all the way down. And then you guessed it, we're going to start connecting these columns of 2 together into columns of 4, and then 8, and then 12, and we will be done, except for the binding. Again, my pins are in perpendicular. Should mean I can go along swimmingly and not worry about breaking my needle. We'll find out. Most of the time it works. All right, I've checked my bobbin. I've got plenty of thread. I've got my thread mouse so that it won't eat the edge of this seam, because that's annoying. And we're just going to top stitch. Oopsies. You can see as this is getting heavier, I'm having to work harder to keep my stitching going straight and even. But you can also see my ironing board back there catching the weight of this, which is helping enormously. There it is, all joined together. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to fall apart? Never. Not without a lot of effort. But I'm just double checking. I did indeed catch the edge all the way down. I'll bring you back when it's all sewn together. Well, here's the back of the quilt. Remember, I told you I had lots of flannel from multiple quilts. And I used them. I mean, I've still got more flannel, but can't do it all in one day. I like this. This really is a reversible quilt. This side has its own beauty in its randomness and its playfulness. I really like it. Let's look at the other side. Isn't it lovely? Look at all those colors. So much happiness. And to think, this was scraps, just end cuts and bits and pieces that I put together and turned into something really beautiful. These bits might have landed in a landfill. Hopefully not. Hopefully at least they would have gone into a dog bed or something like that. But it's amazing what you can do with a little thought and a little energy. You can turn out something really beautiful. Well, I'm Sherry. This is Quilts and Other Happy Accidents. I hope you enjoyed today. Please give me a thumbs up if you did, and keep quilting. That's better.